Confessions of a Spanish Teacher, Part 6. If you've read my blogs, you'll know that I believe in spirituality. Things happen that we can't account for. At around 4 a.m. that morning, I was awoken with a start. I had a vision or a dream, I don't know which. I saw a hooded figure very sadly waiting for Terry. My stomach flipped over and I knew at that moment he was no longer on this earth. I got up and started to call him. No answer, no answer, no answer. My niece got up, her boyfriend went off to work. I just kept calling, still no answer. At 9 he was supposed to be at work, so I alternated my calls between the two places. Still no answer. I rang his sister. She got no answer either. I knew that something had happened. My niece kept insisting that he was probably just making it up or making me worry so that I would go round to the house. But I knew in my heart that was not the case. I rang the Reading police and explained the situation to them. They went to his shop to find it closed. Then they went to the house. They rang me to say the back door was open and they'd gone in and found nothing. They told me not to worry. He had likely gone for a walk somewhere to clear his head. So I just kept ringing. No answer. No answer. No answer. Suddenly, the line was engaged. A little bit of hope flared in my heart. Engaged, engaged, engaged. See, said my niece, he's probably on the phone to his sister. Finally, it rang through and the phone was answered. It wasn't Terry. It was the police. A woman. She asked who I was and I told her. As we were not married, she was very reluctant to give details at first, as technically I was not family. However, I explained to her that that was our shared house, and finally she asked me for the dog's name. My little poodle Zach had stayed with Terry because I could not take him to my niece's house. The policewoman told me that they could not get into the room where Terry was because Zach was guarding him. I asked if he had hung himself in the garage, and she confirmed that this was indeed what he had done. It was the dog howling next to his body that had alerted them on leaving the house, that there was another part of the house that they had not checked. I remember running out into the street. The air was freezing, but I felt dizzy and sick. I took great gulps of it. My heart was thumping and my stomach was churning. I was terrified that I might have a miscarriage. The finality of what had happened was overwhelming. However, the profound sadness I felt was accompanied also by a sense of relief. This is an awful thing to admit, and judge me as you will, but there was a lot of relief. It was over. My baby and I were safe. He was not coming to get us. To this day, I still have recurring nightmares that he's knocking on my window or coming up my path, angry and tearful as he was on that last night, and I wake up in a cold sweat. As the dream fades and I realise that it's not real, I get that same sense of relief that I felt that morning. Terry's brother turned up on the scene. He had spoken to his sister and driven down from Portsmouth to see if he was okay. And to him fell the unenviable task of identifying Terry's body. Suicide is a terrible thing. It affects everyone in the victim's life. It is, of course, unbearably sad that someone felt so desperate to take their own life, but it's a choice too. It can be an act of anger, revenge. Terry had 3 teenage girls, and the effect on them must have been devastating. I had a very good relationship with his family, and his mother told me that he had been insecure and had had suicidal tendencies all his life. Terry himself told me he had considered it many times, especially when he had cancer. But he didn't want his daughters to find him. His mother also told me that he had tried hard to step back and leave me alone, but that he just could not do it. He was obsessed. She did not blame me, but of course I blame myself. Suicide sort of sucks you in. It gives you suicidal thoughts too. Luckily for me, I had my baby to think about, and I put all my energies into finishing my degree and preparing for the arrival of the baby. I moved back into our house, which was difficult, but I had nowhere else to live. However, he had not killed himself in the house itself, so it was bearable. I never went into the garage. Many things that I found there showed me the state of mind he was in and how dangerous he was. Journals, phone logs, etc. I won't go into details, but he was very unbalanced. The coroner also informed me of some things that they had taken away that clearly showed his disturbed state of mind. I learnt that he also had many financial problems that he hadn't mentioned. I often wonder about the woman he was seeing, if she knew what happened, or if she just wondered why he stopped contacting her. I didn't know who she was, so I could not let her know. The first few nights I slept back there, my friend Martine stayed with me. Then I was coping and she moved back home. The first night I slept there back in our bed, I felt a tight embrace of someone putting their arms around me and hugging me tightly. I knew that it was Terry. I know many of you do not believe in these things, but I do. It only happened once, but I was awake, not asleep, and I physically felt it. I've had other experiences over the years, but I won't go into them now. There was an inquest. I had to give evidence. It was awful. The verdict was suicide, and it was even a headline in the local paper. Broken-hearted bookie takes his own life. Terry, I hope you're at peace. I took some time off work, but I knew that sooner or later I would have to face the father of my unborn child and tell him that I was pregnant. Chapter 6, The Father. I will never forget how the father found out. I had planned to tell him, of course, at an opportune time, but I'd been off work because of Terry's death, and that had just not happened. People at the head office knew what had happened to Terry, and one of them, a friend, Janice, knew that I was pregnant, as I had had to provide a sick note for my time off. My first day back was an evening meeting at Windsor, one of my favourite racecourses. Everyone seemed very surprised when the father of my baby, from now on I'll call him Patrick, turned up at the race meeting, although in fact he was not working that day. I like to think he turned up because he had heard about Terry and was worried about my welfare. He came over and chatted, asked how I was, and he stayed to help out through the whole race meeting. At one point before racing started, my friend came up to us as we were chatting and said, "Have you had any morning sickness?" Patrick's jaw dropped and he looked at me questioningly, white as a sheet. "Ah, yes," I said, "and on top of everything else, I'm pregnant." It wasn't the way I would have chosen to tell him. The evening continued, and to give Patrick his due, he stayed until the end, even though technically he wasn't even supposed to be working. He was white-faced, and he looked completely shell-shocked. You could just see the cogs turning, and I expect he was doing quite a lot of calculating with dates. Poor guy. I did feel for him, but he did put it around a bit. I suppose it was inevitable to happen eventually. Maybe it had already happened with someone else. I don't know. He had not taken any precautions to stop it happening, let's put it that way. The next time I worked was at Ascot, and I was put in a tiny shop, working alone upstairs in the members' enclosure. I think this was deliberate, as Patrick appeared almost immediately, and he was the one who did the rotas and organised where people worked. Patrick appeared almost immediately and asked me straight out if the baby was his. I replied that he should not ask that question unless he was really sure that he wants to know the answer. He said he would like to know before anyone else found out. My biggest fear was that he would ask me to have a termination. So I preempted him by saying, "Don't ask me to have a termination." And to his credit, he seemed mortified by this suggestion. He was a Catholic. "Oh no," he said, "this is a life. I would never ask that. I just need to know what you want from me." So I reassured him that I was not expecting him to leave his wife, just maybe some moral and financial support would be useful. He agreed, and I've always thought he was secretly quite thrilled. He was 10 years older than me, well into his 40s, and I do think he saw it as some proof that there was life in the old dog yet. Bless him. For me, I will always be eternally grateful for the son he gave me, even if it was an unexpected event. I love being pregnant. Everyone treats you so nicely. They open doors for you. They ask about your welfare and they carry things for you. This, strangely enough, does not continue after you actually have the baby. Struggling with a pushchair, doors slam in your face, and people seem surprised that you should even be out of the house, letting your baby cry and irritate them. In the UK, at least, it's different in Spain. It was only knowing that I would have to support my baby alone that gave me the strength to finish my degree. After the trauma of Terry's death, I took my finals in the sick bay. I was heavily pregnant. I achieved a 2-1 degree, not unfortunately the first class honours degree I'd been hoped for, had been predicted for me, but I was pleased that I'd actually managed to even complete it. At my graduation ceremony, I was 8 months pregnant. My baby was due at the end of August. He did not arrive until the 13th of September. I could hardly walk. I was like a zeppelin, I was so big. My relationship with Patrick was difficult. I was still working with him, and all kinds of rumours were flying around work. Also, he did not seem to have learnt by his mistake. One absolutely awful day, I was subjected to a couple of hours of listening to one of the other cashiers relating her escapades with him the night before. All the gory details, positions, etc. In the meantime, I was carrying his child, so it was a messed up situation. My son was 2 weeks late, and my midwife was starting to worry. And she said that I should be induced. There were 2 slots available, Friday the 13th of September or Monday the 16th. I just did not feel that I could wait another weekend. So I went for Friday the 13th to get it over with. Lucky for some. On the morning that I was booked in to be induced, my waters broke. Again, I was fortunate that I had a bed booked at the hospital for inducement. Earlier that year, there had been a scare about the safety of taking the pill. And it was a bumper autumn for babies. Women were in labour in the corridors of the hospital. There were no beds available, but I had a labour room all to myself. My son was born without significant incident at 5:55 p.m. on Friday the 13th of September. I brought him home deliriously happy. I just want to mention here another experience that added to my spiritual convictions. 2 weeks after my son was born, my mother fell very ill in Manchester. She had stomach problems and was taken into hospital for investigations. Whilst doing these investigations, her bowel had ruptured and she was rushed into emergency surgery to save her life. My dad said they were running up the corridor with the gurney. It was so touch and go. A ruptured bowel poisons your system. She was given a colostomy and sent immediately to intensive care. The doctor told us she had a 50% chance of recovery. I rushed down from Reading with my 2-week-old son, whom she had never seen. It seems amazing now, but I was allowed to take him into the intensive care unit where my mum was lying in an induced coma. I took her hand and I told her, "Mum, you are going to recover because my son is here," just omitting his name there, "and you're going to see him." Her eyes flickered. My mum did recover from that illness, though she would wear a colostomy bag for the rest of her life, which she hated. When she was conscious, I took my son in to see her, and she told me of the near-death experience she'd had. She was in a tunnel with a bright light at the end of the tunnel, travelling towards it. In the tunnel there were many other people, and animals too. This will be comforting to any of you out there who love pets as I do. She said that suddenly she heard me calling her and that she saw my son and I at the other end of the tunnel. She tried to reach out for us, but every time she got near, we would move further away. She followed us back along the tunnel, away from the light, and we moved further away again. This continued until she was back at the other end of the tunnel, but she still never quite reached us. Then she woke up. Well, we all have our different beliefs, so make of it what you will. My mum was not an imaginative person who made things up. She told me this story as soon as she was able to speak, and I take a lot of comfort from it. So this event, combined with many other experiences I've had, reassures me that there are indeed many things that we don't understand fully. Sorry. Mum, when you finally arrived at the other end of the tunnel, I hope that Dad was there waiting for you, or even holding your hand as you travelled down it. Now my brother Tony has also taken that journey. I miss you all so much. Thank you. That's it for this episode.